What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Nightblade tank. Boy oh boy, how the Nightblade tank has been getting a lot of good treatment over the past few patches. A year ago this used to be one of the worst tank specs in the game. Now in Dragonhold they are arguably one of the top 3 tanking specs in the game, right next to Dragon Knights and Wardens. They come with a lot of damage mitigation as well as some not necessarily unique class debuffs, but some debuffs nonetheless that are difficult to get from other classes or require some sacrifice to get on other classes. So Nightblade tanks have come a long way since a year ago when they used to be really bad. Now they are up there as one of the strongest tank specs in the game. Many endgame groups have a Nightblade tank on reserve for certain trials or certain scenarios where a Nightblade tank will be stronger than your traditional DK or Warden tank. So just like the rest of our build videos, we will not be going over any sort of gear. That has been reserved for a separate tanking gear video, which should be popping up in the upper right hand corner right around now. So if you're interested in knowing what gear you should be running on a tank, feel free to pause this video, go ahead and check out the tanking gear video, and then come back here. This video will be discussing skills you want to have as a tank, Nightblade tank specifically, as well as just sort of the general philosophy behind tanking and what sets Nightblade tanks apart from the other classes in the game. So let's go ahead and get started here first with our skills on our front bar. This is the sword and board bar. We have our taunt, pierce armor, and we have heroic slash. Heroic slash for the minor maim and minor heroism. Then you have Pierce Armor, or you can go with Ransack, but Ransack is not really as important because you already have a source of minor protection through one of your class abilities. So Pierce Armor is going to be the preferred morph here. It provides that major fracture and a major breach. Heroic Slash, then we have Dark Cloak, which is your source of minor protection, as well as your self-heal. So the self-heal here heals us for, in this instance, 2187 every second over 8 seconds. This does scale off of your max health. So in total, you're going to be recovering, I believe it's around 30 to 33% of your max health over the full 8 seconds, but it is over 8 seconds. So if you go ahead and do the math, it ends up being roughly about 4 to 6% of your health is recovered every second. So you will need to be a little bit mindful of when you use Dark Cloak because you don't really have a burst heal like the DKs or the Wardens do. So you will need to be mindful of when you are activating Dark Cloak, so that way you can anticipate the sort of heavy damage that's incoming to you, so you can get the heal going. So that sort of lack of a burst heal is one of the weaknesses of Nightblade tanks, but in general, because of all the additional mitigation you get, it's not that big of a deal, but it does require a little bit of mechanical knowledge in order to know when the best time to use Dark Cloak here. Next we have Lotus Fan, which inflicts minor vulnerability as an AoE effect. So Lotus Fan does have an AoE around you, a 6 meter AoE. So it's a 6 meter AoE minor vulnerability, which is incredibly useful in fights where you have ads, in trash fights, because you can just teleport in there and hit everybody with minor vulnerability, which is an incredibly strong debuff for damage. This is the most consistent way to, one of the more consistent ways I should say, of applying minor vulnerability, and one of the only ways, if not the only way, to apply minor vulnerability to multiple enemies at the same time. So incredibly powerful move here. You definitely want to have this on a Nightblade tank. And then we have a flex spot here, but I am using Mirage in this flex spot, which gives us major evasion, which reduces damage from AoE attacks by 25%, and minor resolve, which gives us some additional physical and spell resistance. So really nice to have here. Again, some additional damage mitigation through major evasion. We don't have to run something weird like a dual wield backbar to get major evasion. So that's really powerful for overall damage mitigation. A lot of abilities in the game, attacks that are done by bosses, count as AoE damage. So really powerful mitigation tool here. Then you have a flex ultimate. We have reviving barrier here, but there are some other ultimates that you can use. On our back bar, we have inner rage as a ranged taunt. Then we have balance for the major resolve, but mostly for the additional magic sustained here. So Nightblade tanks don't have a dedicated move that provides major resolve. Your major resolve actually comes from the shadow barrier passive here under the shadow line. So whenever you use Dark Cloak, you also get major resolve here. So you get this with 5 pieces here. You get it for 15 seconds. So it's going to be a little bit longer if you had it. If you have seven armor pieces. So at 7 armor pieces, heavy armor pieces, you have 18 seconds worth of major resolve here. So you don't really need to, you're not really running this for the major resolve, you're mainly running this for the magicka regen that you're getting by running balance here. Yes, the health cost as well as the reduction in healing done is going to be a bit of a downer, but you should have healers that are able to heal you right back up to full and kind of make up for that health cost there. With a staff backbar, you're going to want to run block aid, so ice staff, lightning staff, make sure to run block aid. This is to help proc your backbar enchant. If you're running a bow backbar, you're going to want to run endless hail instead. Then you have 2 abilities here which are important. So the first one is definitely something I would always run. The second one is kind of dependent on whether you need to sustain or not. The first one is Relentless Focus. You can also go with the other more Merciless Resolve here. This just provides some additional damage mitigation. So you get up to 5 stacks of Relentless Focus or Merciless Resolve, and each stack gives you 2% damage taken reduction of 2%. So you can get a maximum of additional 10% damage mitigation, which is unique and does stack with other sources of damage mitigation. The other thing you can also do is you can also just fire this off and you get a little burst heal out of it. So Relentless Focus here, you would get about a 3k heal, so not really worth running it for the heal. If you're running Merciless Resolve instead, you get a 50% heal, so you get a little bit more. You get 5,000 healing done instead. Same amount of mitigation though. And you don't need to renew this at all because the stacks and the mitigation actually do carry over as long as you're in combat. So as long as you manage to get those 5 stacks going and they are up, you can no longer focus on, you don't have to rebuff this anymore unless you want to use the burst heal from the bow for whatever reason. And then for our sustain, our stamina sustain, we have Leeching Strikes. So this restores stamina whenever you do a light or heavy attack, but it also restores a maximum 4270 stamina when it runs out after 20 seconds. So very nice for stamina sustain, but if you don't need to run it for stamina sustain, then you can obviously drop this for some other ability. And then we have Aggressive Warhorn for the major force buff. Now in terms of other abilities you're going to want to have on hand, Piercing Mark is one ability that might be beneficial. So there are going to be some fights where you're going to be at ranged for whatever reason. There might be a strategy that you guys are using where the tank has to stay at range. A good example of this would be Laquesti's hard mode. If you're the main tank taking Laquesti's, one of the primary strategies is to actually stay far away and run, basically run the reflect move from the one-handed shield line, but by doing so, you will not be able to apply Major Fracture, Major Breach through Pierce Armor, so that's where you want to use Piercing Mark. So this is an important skill to have on hand for those instances where you will not be able to use Pierce Armor. Under the Shadow line, you can run Refreshing Path, which helps heal you and allies as well, so it's a little bit of a self-heal. It's a self-heal over time and also heals other people. If you're running Symphony of Blades, you might want to run this here because you will need to heal other people in order to proc Symphony of Blades. Manifestation of Terror is going to be your hard CC. You can also go with Mass Hysteria as well. Both of them are perfectly fine morphs to choose. Manifestation of Terror allows you to fear enemies right near you as well as enemies potentially farther away, so kind of more beneficial that way. But Mass Hysteria will actually fear more enemies for a longer period of time as well. So it's kind of up to you which one you want to choose. Remember that fear now is a hard CC. Instead of running away, they all cower now, so pretty strong CC move here. Then if you want another source of minor maim with a little bit of additional damage, you can go on Darkshade. Darkshade also has a kind of AoE attack, which also afflicts minor maim, so a little bit of an AoE minor maim. Generally speaking, not particularly useful though, because you can normally get minor maim just by running Heroic Slash instead, which you should be having up all the times, because it also provides that minor heroism. Under the Siphoning line, you can run Debilitate for minor magicka steal. If neither of your healers want to run Ellie Drain, for example, you can just run Debilitate here. It gives you a little bit of damage as well, so that always helps out. Healthy Offering for a burst heal, but not really all that useful at all. It does cost you some health. The heal itself is actually not terrible for a Nightblade, at least for a tank. It's obviously better on a healer. One reason why you might want to run Healthy Offering though is for the minor mending, which increases your healing done. So you can do something like Healthy Offering and Dark Cloak if you're inclined to do so to get some more healing out of Dark Cloak. The dot that it puts on you is not that strong if you're only using it once. You can even run Swallow Soul for another heal if you'd like. It's not a very powerful self-heal, so in this instance it's only 1500 every 2 seconds, so not that great, but it's still another heal over time, self-heal if you want to do that. Funnel Health is probably the weaker option here, so you'd probably just go with Swallow Soul. In terms of ultimates, while we're on the class lines here, all 3 class ultimates do have a role, kind of have their own niche use scenarios. Incapacitating Strike, you get the Reeve passive, which gives you magic and stamina back whenever you do a light or heavy attack, so nice for additional sustain there. Under the Shatter, you can run Bolstering Darkness for major protection, and plus it also provides a synergy, which gives up a heal over time component. And then you have Soul Siphon, which is a small burst heal followed by a large heal over time, along with the Major Vitality, so you get even more healing out of the ultimate, and another synergy, which deals damage and heals for that same amount. So all 3 ultimates do have their use cases, kind of pick whichever one you want to run. Under the one-handed line, either morph of Defensive Posture, Defensive Stance, or Absorb Missile. Both of them are good abilities to have on hand if you are fighting something that you know is going to be doing projectile damage to you. So more Absorb Missile will give you a heal, and as well as a damage shield, so it actually provides essentially an additional 15, actually in this instance, just shy of 16,000 additional health here, essentially is what Absorb Missile gives you. Defensive Stance reflects a projectile back, so Lekesti's hard mode, you would run Defensive Stance, you can reflect his Frostbolt back to Lekesti's if you're staying at range. Let's provide some additional block mitigation as well, so always nice to have on hand if you don't really have any other skills you want to run on your sword and board bar. If you're running the bow, Endless Hail is going to be how you proc your enchants, and you might also want to pick up Venom Arrow for the ranged interrupt. Under the Destro Staff line, Elemental Blockade procs your enchant, Rushing Shock is your ranged interrupt, and Elemental Drain is always nice to kind of have just in case your healers don't want to run it at all. Under the Heavy Armor line, either morph of Unstoppable, so Immovable or Unstoppable Brute, are both pretty useful. You can pick which either morph you'd like. This gives you immunity to knockback and disabling effects, which might be useful for some boss fights, which will knock you down. So really nice, but it does also reduce your movement speed. So with 5 heavy armor, you're down to 10% movement speed. With 7 heavy armor, you can only move by dodge rolling. So just be mindful of that if you want to run either ability here. Under the Fighter's Guild line, you have Ring of Preservation, which provides mana protection as well as a small heal over time as well. So really great for instances where you guys are all going to be stacked up to kind of deal with any sort of fight mechanics. Nightblades do not have a class chains, so you will need to run Silver Leash in order to pull enemies to you, so keep that in mind. This does use stamina, so you will want to manage your stamina accordingly while you're running Silver Leash. Under the Psijic Order line, either morph of Meditate, so Introspection or Deep Thoughts, either morph, whichever one you want to choose, is an option to replace Balance. So this will give you health, stamina, and magicka back. The downside is that it is a channeled ability, so you will not be able to block and get the benefits of this ability at the same time. So if you raise your block, you just instantly stop whatever the channel itself, and you just raise your shield instead. You can kind of get around this a little bit by running getting the Deliberation passive, which gives you major protection while you're channeling Meditate, but it's not as much mitigation as just raw blocking would provide, obviously. And then make sure to have all the Undaunted abilities unlocked. You want Overflowing Altar for the stronger Blood Feast synergy, Shadow Soak for the Black Widow synergy, which is still okay. It's not as strong as it used to be, but it's still decent. It also helps just provide an additional synergy for Major Slayer uptime with Lekesti's. Obviously your range taunt, Bone Surge for the Spinal Surge synergy, which provides major vitality to up to 6 people. So that's useful in certain scenarios where you might have healing debuffs coming out from fight mechanics. You have Energy Orb, which acts as a heal, so important if you want to proc Symphony of Blades if you're using that set. And then under the Alliance War line, you have Echoing Vigor for another heal to the group if you're running Symphony of Blades. It also stacks with other people's vigors as well, so you're able to provide some decent additional healing strength that way. Then on the support line, Reviving Barrier and Efficient Purge. Purge if you need to cleanse things off yourself or everybody else. Both of these also provide additional magicka regen if you have them slotted, so up to 10% depending on how much you've leveled up your magicka aid passive here. So that pretty much covers all of the skills you might want to have. So kind of in summary here, a lot of these abilities are abilities you don't want to swap out. So that's one of the weaknesses of Nightblade tanks. You don't have a lot of flexibility when it comes to flex spots. Pierce Armor, Heroic Slash, Dark Cloak, Lotus Fan, all four of these abilities are staples, and then this is a flex spot, and you have a flex ultimate. On the back bar, Inner Rage, some way to proc your enchants, and then Relentless Focus are the three staples, and then Balance and Leeching Strikes can be swapped out as needed. So if you don't need to sustain, you can swap these abilities out. Then Warhorn is a staple ultimate as well. So that's all the skills. What about the philosophy behind tanking? So tanking in ESO, you have a couple of jobs. The first and foremost is obviously to be a good tank. That means staying alive, taunting the enemies, basically keeping the big baddies off of your teammates. So if you aren't able to do that, you're not a good tank. So make sure to do that. Now, a lot of knowing how to stay alive, learning how to stay alive, and just comes from field experience. So you do need to actually tank stuff to be a good tank. And it is going to take you a little bit to kind of learn all of the different fight mechanics and how to deal with all different fight mechanics as well. You will learn which moves you can dodge roll, when to time your dodge roll so you actually avoid taking damage, and so on and so forth, how to manage your resources, etc. Those are all pretty much the kind of core behind being an alright tank. But what separates out the good tanks from the great tanks is the abilities to support your allies. Specifically your DPS. Kind of the point behind tanks and healers in ESO is to help benefit your DPS. Get them to do as much damage as possible. The shorter the fight is, the less risk there is involved with somebody dying, the less damage you're taking, and so on and so forth. So a lot of the buffs and debuffs that help provide some additional DPS comes from sets that you're wearing. So for example, Ebon allows DPS to focus a little bit less into health. Alkosh provides a resistance debuff to the enemies, so they don't need to invest as many points into piercing or spell erosion. And some buffs and debuffs come from your sets. So for example, Minor Vulnerability from Lotus Fan just improves the amount of damage your DPS are able to do, and so on. If you're running something like Symphony of Blades, the additional resources that you give back using Symphony of Blades helps out overall DPS sustain, which helps improve the overall DPS. So that's kind of the bottom line for tanks. So what separates out good tanks from great tanks is the ability to basically manage your buffs, manage your debuffs very well. The Nightblade tank that gets very high uptime on Minor Vulnerability by using Lotus Fan is going to be, in the eyes of a lot of raid leaders, better than a Nightblade tank that does not have as much uptime but kind of similar survivability. So once you learn how to be survivable, once you kind of know the basics behind tanking, that's when you want to shift over to using more beneficial sets, more group-oriented sets, and start looking at improving your buff and debuff uptimes. So Nightblade tanks have quite a few advantages over some other classes, but they also have a couple of drawbacks as well. One of the biggest drawbacks is you don't have a damage shield, and you don't have a burst heal. Or at the very least, you don't have a very strong burst heal. So your main heal is going to be coming from Dark Cloak, which is a heal over time. So you don't have the same kind of burst heal potential as a Dragon Knight with Green Dragon Blood or Warden with Pull the Wind does. So that's something you want to keep in mind as you're playing a Nightblade tank, that you will not necessarily be able to recover instantly right away from a big hit like a DK would be able to. So you kind of have to be very proactive with getting your heal over times going, so that way when the big hits do come, you have all your hots ticking already, so that way you can just heal up gradually over time there. So that's one of the big drawbacks. The other one is that you don't have a damage shield. Not quite as big of a drawback, but the fact that DKs have a damage shield, Sork tanks have a damage shield, that sort of plays a little bit into their favor, just because damage shields pretty much act as additional health here. So Dragon Knight that has an additional 6k shield essentially has an additional 6k health that they can kind of call on hand whenever they need to. Nightblades don't really have that, so that's one of the weaknesses of Nightblade tanks. But they do make up for this though by having way more sources of mitigation than some other tanks do. The only other tank that might have even more mitigation would be the Sork tank with Bound Aegis, but Nightblade tanks have on-demand minor protection, on-demand major evasion, on-demand minor resolve, and they have an additional unique 10% additional damage mitigation. So overall, they have a lot of ways to mitigate damage, and combine that with their many heal over times, both self and to the group. That actually makes them pretty tanky overall, surprisingly enough, even with the lack of a burst heal. The other major thing with Nightblade tanks is the fact that they have an AoE minor vulnerability. They are one of the few classes that have a source of minor vulnerability, the other one being Wardens with Fetcher Infection. But unlike Wardens, Lotus Fan provides AoE minor vulnerability, which is incredibly strong in trash fights, and that's where a lot of time is sort of eaten up. And with like trials guilds that are running for speed, running for scores, a lot of the time spent is actually perfecting the trash fights. So being able to apply minor vulnerability right away on a trash fight just makes them shorter and saves you some additional time. It's a really powerful ability there. So that's kind of what separates out Nightblade tanks from other tanks. The fact that they have an AoE minor vulnerability and they have a lot of different sources of mitigation that are a little bit harder to come by on some other classes. But of course, the weaknesses are that they don't have a burst heal and they don't have a damage shield either. So you're kind of gaining one form of survivability, but trading it off by losing another form. But overall, Nightblade tanks are great. They are really awesome. A lot of trials guilds that are running Sunspire and doing Godslayer progression usually have a Nightblade main tank. And with all the buffs that they've been getting over the past few patches, they're definitely, again, one of the strongest classes in the game right now when it comes to tanking. But that concludes this video. Hopefully you guys found this informative. If you guys have any questions about the build, feel free to ask them down in the comment section below. Again, hope you guys found this informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.